Hello, welcome to the Positive Posting Conversation, the show about how to have a better relationship with your dog and cat. I'm Zazie Todd, author of the books Wag and Purr and creator of Companion Animal Psychology blog. My co-host Kristi Benson is a dog trainer and anthropologist, and she also works for the Academy for Dog Trainers. We don't give advice on your pet, so if you have concerns, see your veterinarian, dog trainer or cat behaviourist as appropriate. Thanks for joining us today. We talk with Maria Karunungan about teaching dogs recall, how to stop dogs from getting lost, and what she's learned from her background in educational research that helps dog trainers work with their clients. As well, in the book section, we talk about what we're reading right now, and there may be some spoilers. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Positive Post in Conversation with myself, Zazie Todd, and as always, my friend and colleague, Kristi Benson. How are you, Kristi?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm super excited because today we're joined by an absolutely amazing dog trainer, Maria Karunungan of Fetch the Leash in Burlington, Vermont. Maria is an honours graduate of the Academy for Dog Trainers. She is a PCBCA from the Pet Professional Guild and a certified separation anxiety trainer. But Maria also has a PhD in educational research from Emory University and an undergraduate degree in music from Yale University. And Maria's experience also includes working with a wide range of shelter animals at various shelters in Northern California. So thank you so much for joining us today, Maria. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for chatting with us. We're going to be mainly talking about how to teach your dog to come when called today. But first up, how did you get into dog training, especially from your background and your PhD, and then you've made this move to dog training? How did that happen?
Yeah, I had no idea it was not on my radar in any way, shape, or form when I was a kid that I could have a career as a dog trainer. I always loved animals and I was always training my pet animals when I was a kid. But again, the idea that this could be something that I would do for a living just never crossed my mind. I always wanted to be a teacher. And so I started off with that in mind, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just contributing to, systemic inequities and things like that. So I went into research to learn a little bit more about how educational systems work and things like that. And then I just realized that I didn't want to necessarily be part of the way that educational research functions in academia, because I felt like I was a little too far away from actually being able to help people. So I got a little sort of sidetracked and wound up just working a regular Joe Schmo corporate job. And while I was doing that, I was volunteering at a local animal shelter. And I loved the time that I was spending there. I was volunteering with both cats and dogs. And one day they posted a full-time position at the shelter. And I kind of looked at it like, and I almost applied sort of out of a whim. And then when I got the job, I started thinking about it. And I was like, I actually had to have a hard think with myself. It's like, make enough to make a living or do something really exciting that you really love. And I just decided that I really, really loved the time that I was spending with the animals. So I took the plunge.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think that's a wonderful transition. And I'm always interested when someone has come from a PhD, because that's I came from a PhD too, into dog training. And now you're this amazing, wonderful dog trainer with all these dog training qualifications as well. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. So I guess one of the reasons why Zazie and I wanted to speak with you is we got talking about lost dogs. So dogs who, maybe they're loose on a walk and they run away or they get out of somebody's yard. And we were just thinking, that there's a little bit of a lack of clarity, I think, amongst dog guardians about how to prevent this, especially when dogs are being walked loose. And sort of, I think there's an expectation from people that dogs will just stick around because that's what dogs do. So people don't necessarily train recalls, which is, aside from great fencing, is I think one of our bulwarks against lost dogs is doing the work to train a good recall with our dogs. So that's why we wanted to speak with you about lost dogs, and we wanted to speak with you about training recall. So, our first question, I think, is you, as someone who does a ton of dog training, as a practitioner in this field, why do you think it's important skill for dogs just in general to have this training?
Well, I think first of all, it can save a dog's life. You just never know. You might have a really great confinement system. You mentioned a really great fence, but you just never know when, let's say, the fence breaks for whatever reason, or someone unanticipated leaves something open, or you might have just opened the door to grab a package or something, and your dog sees a squirrel across the street, and there's a car coming. So it really could save your dog's life. I'm kind of talking about it like as a seatbelt, but I actually think that recalls are fun. So it's not just a tool to use with your dog. It's really fun to play recall games with your dog, and to just build that rapport and that engagement. But I also think that it can increase your dog's quality of life. Because then the world opens up for your dog. You can take them places. You could go hiking with them. You could let them go out and check out all the great smells and go rolling in the mud and have this sort of this comfort that you've put the time in to training them, and that you feel that your chances are really strong that they will come back if you call them.
For sure. Yeah, I completely agree about the welfare increasing sort of aspect of training recalls. If you I think some people with dogs feel like recall is something that dogs are kind of born with. So they either have it or they don't. They don't see it as this thing that we actually have to train. It's not even that hard to train, but they're sort of like, oh, my dog doesn't recall. And so, oh, my dog has floppy ears. You're like, well, you can actually change that.
Totally.
Yeah, and I love how you emphasize both the fun part and the necessary part, so the essential part. And we know that there's a common figure that people are used to hearing about the importance of socialization for puppies, because we know that one of the leading causes of death of dogs under 3 is behavior issues, which could be prevented by socialization. But one of the other leading causes of death of dogs under the age of 3 is actually getting hit by cars. And in so many cases, of course, a good recall, as you say, it literally could save the dog's life. So that makes it so important. And of course, all 3 of us are force retrainers, so we only use rewards to train recall. But I want to take a moment to explain that it's not a good idea to use a shock collar to train recall at all, because it has risks for your dog, including the usual risks of any aversive method, which are increased fear, anxiety, aggression, stress, a worse relationship with the guardian, the dog being pessimistic, and of course the dog potentially associating the shock with something else in the environment rather than their behavior at the time. And that could be you, or it could be passers-by or other dogs nearby, therefore making the dog afraid of you or afraid of other dogs and reactive, and so on. There's also research which shows that training recall with rewards is better, more efficient than using a shock collar, and that's from some research done in the UK. And of course, we all love to use rewards in training. I think you alluded to the fun. I think the rewards is one part of the fun of teaching dogs to come when called. So what kind of treats do you recommend, Maria, to your clients when they're teaching their dog to come when called?
Well, for training initially, I actually always give out a tin of sardines in our basic level classes. It always surprises people, gives them an example of something that's super high value, that's novel, and it kind of impresses upon them that when we mean special treat or recalls, we definitely mean special. This is, by the way, something I got from the academy, so just want to give credit. It's not an original invention of mine. And out in the real world, my go-to is baby food. I did try sardines a couple of times, and it was so messy that I never got the fish oil completely out of my winter coat. So I learned to stick with sardines for mostly supercharging the recall cue. And teaching the dog how mind-blowingly amazing it is to hear that word. And then when we get to actual usage, I switch over to baby food, and I'm really careful. I tell people to be really careful that is reserved for recalls, and not to use it in other situations. Otherwise, it gets old for the dog, and then it's no longer special. I really like baby food because it has a long shelf life, and you can store it in the glove compartment, and it's ready to go. You just have an impulse to go hiking with your dog. It's a beautiful day, and you're like, yeah, and you don't have to have any other special preparation.
So do you take the little jars and crack them and let the dog lick, or?
Mm-hmm. Yep. You can do this a couple of ways. It depends on the dog. Some dogs are very talented and they can pretty much slurp the whole jar's worth with 1 or 2 licks. Some dogs are a little more tentative, and they'll take a few licks and they'll be like, wow, that's really cool. And then it's easy to close the jar and have more ready. So for the dogs that are very good at getting it all out in one go, I might pour a little bit onto the lid and have them lick the lid.
Fancy.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny about the fish oil because one of the things I like to use is tripe stick or tripe flavored treats. But then I have moments when I pick up my coat and I think, why does my coat sting so bad? And it's because I've left tripe treats in the pockets.
When I taught classes, I used to use the sardine trick too. And it really works. And again, kudos to the Academy for that idea. But I remember one of the class students coming to class one day and being like, wow, Kristi, someone, just exactly like you said, Maria, someone left the door open and the dog saw something, bolted through the door onto a trafficy street. And that had happened in the past, and it was a worrisome thing. And, they just used their new recall cue and the dog like stopped on a dime and came back in and they were like, you're magic, like they just could. And I'm like, no, I'm not magic. Offering conditioning is magic. So I think, we keep going back to this idea about safety, and I think safety and sort of the welfare increasing aspects of training a recall are really important. And one of the things that, when Zazie and I were talking about lost dogs is that I have actually had to go through that myself. We had more than once actually, before I became a dog trainer and got a clue. One point we were walking with a bunch of our sled dogs, and 2 of them, because sled dogs are they really like to wander, and they can go far, they're not going to peter out after 10 meters, right? They will really go far. So we had 2 of the 2 dogs who were just kind of like, hey, let's go. And they left, and one of them came back, and the other one, Sugar, who is, you probably remember seeing pictures of her, little compact white, little floppy. Anyway, she was gone, and she ended up being, seen about 10 miles from our house. And it was across a provincial border, and it was like another whole town. And she ended up being lost for 10 days. And it was absolutely, I was just constantly feeling so much stress. And we were calling around, to people and trying to get sightings, and it was a rural farm area. So it's not like we could just put up a bunch of posters and expect sightings. So we were talking to people, and anyway, it was an extremely awful, stressful time. And then finally, we started closing in. We felt like we were, instead of it being like we saw her 3 days ago, someone would be like, I just saw her 45 minutes ago, and we were, so anyway, at midnight we got a call. I think we just saw your dog, and we saw your dog 45 minutes ago. We drove, across, and we saw, we were wandering around through this tiny dead Saskatchewan town with a scary, the moon, and it was all very it should have been a horror film essentially. And then we see her just walking along the road, and we're like, oh my God, Sugar. And she just comes up to us, and she was perfectly fine. She looked great. She'd obviously been, I don't know, eating other dogs' food, or she'd been hunting for herself, but she's clean, and but we were just wrecked, and I think that that had a happy ending, but it might not have, it could have had a terrible ending if she hadn't been capable, if it had been another season. So yeah, these things happen.
Yeah, that's scary. Yeah. It's, and that's the thing, is that recall is is kind of the one behavior that you can't count on. If you don't have a leash on your dog, or you don't have a fence, the only thing you can count on is prior history of reinforcement for coming. So it's just, yeah, I don't know what I would have done if I were you.
Yeah, it was, but I mean, that point was long before I became a dog trainer, and I didn't even have a sense that recall was something that could be trained, and I didn't bring food on our walks. I don't know how I existed with the dogs. I look back and I'm like, how did that even work with my life? It makes no sense. We just barely made it through, I think, with everything. So, but I think it's sort of a good question. It's sort of good information that needs to get out there more. And you've done a ton of work with newly adopted dogs and with the adoption process and working in shelters. So what do you counsel people, especially for dogs? And I know you've had one who's a flight risk. How do you counsel them through this? What are your scripts?
Well, I usually tell people don't take that risk when you first bring the animal home. It's really common actually for people to lose their dogs right after adoption. Something, the collar's they're just getting to know their dog and the collar's too loose and they just slip out of it or something. So I always just encourage people to keep their dogs on leash until they know them a little better, have let them settle in. I think making sure that they go for walks in the neighborhood and get to know your neighborhood so at least they know how to come home if they do get lost can be helpful. Making sure that they're familiar if there's woods around your house, making sure they're familiar with the trails in those woods, but on leash initially as they acclimate and habituate. Using long lines as a transitional tool so that it kind of simulates being off leash and gives them a little bit more freedom to go out, but you're still holding the end of it so that you don't lose them. And then, really having a backup system. So for your confinement, you might not just want to have one gate. You might want to have like a baby gate and a door or a door and a second gate, just sort of thinking about having, if one thing fails, having a backup. With long lines, I like teaching them to like just an informal, like come back in and every now and then and get some treats. They're always carrying treats so that the dog knows that just starts to sort of yo-yo back and forth. And I joke with people, it's like having your dog acknowledge that you exist. Like when they go out and there's all these really great smells and stuff, and then they come back in and you're like, oh yeah, you came back, and giving them a treat, but making sure that you've got them on leash this whole time that they're learning. So I'm actually personally quite conservative with my own dogs. I don't let them off leash for a good long while until, I've developed a relationship with them and until I know that I have actually worked on the recall behavior. Funny story, I don't know if I should say this, but I signed a contract with a shelter when I adopted a scaredy dog. And I agreed that I would never let that dog off leash because he was known to be a scaredy dog. He came from a 150 dog herding situation, and he just easily spooked at everything. And I was very good about it for about 4 or 5 years. And I never, ever, ever let him off leash. And then there came a point where I was using a long line as a tool, and he eventually, we just had that relationship. And I never, for the course of his life, I never did it like on days like fireworks, like July 4th or something like that. I still wouldn't let him off leash on days like that. But there were just certain moments where I was like, okay, it's quiet. I feel confident. We've done a lot of training. I have a solid relationship with him. And it worked. He was really reliable, but I wouldn't take chances. I would be careful. Then the other thing I recommend people do is make sure their dog is microchipped. And lately now they have the GPS collars. So if your dog does get loose, you might be able to find them if you make sure your microchip is registered. So that your contact information is associated with your dog's chip.
Brilliant. There's loads of tips there that people can use. Thank you. So we're here with Maria Karunungan of Fetch the Leash, and we're talking about how to stop your dog from getting lost and how to teach them a good recall. So you just shared loads of great tips with us, but are there any other tips that we have for how to stop a dog from getting lost, or indeed how to find a dog who has been lost? Because I'll just add that one of the things we know from some of the research is that when a dog has been lost for more than 1 day, that's something that counts as quite a stressful life experience for them. And people who've had that happen, it's one of the things that people say can affect their dog's behavior going forward. So apart from the stress that we go through, of course, it's tremendously stressful for the dog if they get lost too. So you just talked about fireworks, and you're right, some dogs get very scared when there are fireworks. So maybe, one tip might be to keep dogs indoors, or not leave them in the yard, or keep them on leash if you go out on days when there are fireworks or thunderstorms as well, because dogs can sometimes escape if they're scared. Do you have any other tips about either not losing your dog or finding them if they are lost?
I would just, I think also just making sure that that, you can have them registered with your local towns, and, making sure your neighbors know who your dogs are. If you have, if you live in a neighborhood where that would work. And really training, doing lots and lots of training, to help their dog come when called. I think that with the things like, thunderstorms too, fireworks, just sort of making wise decisions about staying home with their dog and maybe not going to that gathering that you thought you might like to go to, or just making sure that they're actually especially the first time, if you don't know them, making sure that they're comfortable with those noises before leaving them home alone in that situation.
Yeah. And what do you say to your clients about the amount of practice that they have to do to make sure that they've got a good recall?
Lots and lots and lots of practice. Yeah. That is not just a matter of if they do it once, they know it, that they really need to have muscle memory. They need to feel that it's super fun. They need to have a really, really solid history of doing this many, 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 many times and getting amazing snacks, and just never doubting that it's not worth their while, never doubting that it's worth their while to come.
Just listening to you talk about some of the sort of ways that we can help guardians whose dogs are lost. And it sort of flagged to me a bigger picture thing about breeding and socialization, that it would really help a lost dog if they were comfortable with strangers. And I think that's something that, if you're like us, you probably get a ton of dog content in your feed. So I see a lot of lost dog posts, and a lot of them say, don't chase or call. This dog is too scared of people to approach. And it just makes me think, as dog people, people who are acquiring dogs from breeders, we need to do better. If dogs are social and friendly to strangers, how much more easy would it be for that dog to be caught if they're like, oh, here's a person? Some of those dogs who are just like, I love people, and they go up to people. So even if there's a moment of startle to begin with, we had another sled dog who we didn't know she was thunder fearful. She was new to us, and she literally ran through a fence. Like she made a hole and hurt herself to run through a fence the first time that she experienced thunder. And she ran for a couple of miles, saw a guy and was like, hey guy, and just went in his house, and lived with him for a couple of days. We were looking for her, and finally, we got, oh, she's staying with this guy. And this guy, it's just feeding her. I was like, oh, look, I got a dog now. So, she was so friendly to strangers that she had this comfortable life eating like pork and beans with Buddy down the road. So I think, if we could do better job breeding and socializing dogs to be friendly to strangers, I think that would take away one of those things of like the whole, this dog is too fearful of people to even be caught by a stranger, I think is something that we can control a little bit.
That's true. I actually once lost a cat too. And the cat was so friendly that a neighbor took him in, and didn't realize the cat was missing until I posted some signs, and they said, well, he came knocking on my front door and I just opened it, and he was so sweet. I was like, well, thank you for providing an indoor space for him to hang out.
I once found someone's dog in our yard when I came home. I drove home. There'd been a really bad thunderstorm, and I came in and I parked and I got out of the car, and then at first I actually was scared because I just saw a brown shape emerge from a bush, and I was thinking, oh, is it a bear cub or something? But it wasn't. It was a dog that I knew who had run away from their owner in the middle of the thunderstorm and came and hid in my yard and waited. So luckily we were able to reunite her quite quickly. But I think thunderstorms are a common time for dogs to actually go missing, unfortunately, because so many dogs are scared of thunder.
Yeah. Yeah, I recently picked up a dog, and I was just fueling up my car, and this dog just appeared, and I could tell the dog was like not used to, it wasn't a community dog anyway. So I like opened my car door, and the dog's like got in the car. And I'm like, okay, guess I'm going to try and help find this, and then I was driving around like looking for someone who is maybe, holding a leash calling. I was going to go to the dog park, and I saw a guy who was riding a bike looking around calling, and he looked at my car and he's like, and came, and then it was his dog, and he collected it. So, but the fact that dog was friendly and comfortable enough with me, a complete stranger, to come and get in my car, could have saved that dog's life because we were on the highway. So
sure, yeah.
So earlier, Zazie sort of alluded to the fact that you have a PhD, and your PhD is in education. I think it's such a cool thing that you are bringing that to dog training, because dog training is, our old story, it's unregulated. Anyone can do it, they, and charge money for it. So the fact that you have sort of educated yourself in how to teach people, I think is so cool and fascinating and useful for our profession. So based on sort of your knowledge of how to educate people, what are your sort of tips coming from that domain about how people can better sort of teach their clients?
I think this may seem obvious to a lot of people, but honestly, it gets easily overlooked. And the best thing is to really understand where your client is coming from, to understand the framework that they're operating in. If they're a single mom, they work long hours. It's really, really important not to judge people for the situations they find themselves in, and to understand, what their cultural attitude towards dogs might be. So I see myself as a person who's sort of facilitating and kind of collaborating with them to figure out how to make sure that their dog can get the quality life that they need to have, while also creating the behavior change that they're hoping for. And sometimes the goals are not realistic or fair to the dog. And that's where we might have to sort of try to find that space in the middle. Some people may have different perspectives on how to handle dogs, for example. They may operate from a mindset that if the dog isn't getting right, they need to use horse or be heavy-handed. So when I run into this, I'm always sort of cognizant that that person might live in a completely different world from me and just might not be understanding that the dog isn't trying to be stubborn or willful, that the dog might actually be confused or might need incentive. And I think what helps me is just knowing that at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a person who hires a dog trainer and doesn't actually love their dog. So understanding their perspective and the worldview that they're operating from is really the first step in making that connection. And you can't really help the client to progress if you're not meeting them where they are at. So that's kind of the big takeaway that my PhD is in multicultural and education. So that's where I'm operating from. So sometimes sometimes we wind up, in terms of like goal setting, we wind up just laughing and learning to accept the dog that they have instead of trying to completely change their dog's personality. And we often just find it's a nice journey to just kind of really listen and understand where they're coming from, and then share with them what I know about dogs. And usually the biggest thing is how slowly we need to go with the training and how methodical and systematic we need to be. And not necessarily expect the dog to be able to go so far so fast.
I love that. So you're really talking about it as a collaboration between you and the dog's guardian, rather than you saying, I'm the expert and this is what you have to do. And I think it makes a big, big difference to know where people are and where they're coming from. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for sharing all of your tips with us. They're so helpful and useful. And I think we probably could talk about recall for a very long time, but it's time to move on to the next section of the podcast, which is about books. So we're all going to share a book that we are reading at the moment. And Maria, let's start with you. What are you reading right now?
Well, I just finished this book. It's called A Wizard of Earthsea. And it has nothing to do with dogs or dog training. It's a fantasy book. I sometimes enjoy just being transported into a completely different world and getting mesmerized by that. So it's about a wizard who doesn't know he's a wizard, and finds himself. It actually has animals in it. Finds that he has a natural connection to animals and is able to communicate with them.
That sounds really cool. Thank you. Kristi, what are you reading right now?
I've recently picked up a book that I've read before, and I don't read or understand or get poetry like at all. Like I have like a kindergarten level ability to understand symbolism, but I do really like Ogden Nash, who writes like verse. So he writes like really clever, silly, but so satisfyingly delicious verse. And so I have this book, and sometimes I just pick it up and browse through it. And it, again, I think like the fantasy that Maria was talking about, it just is a way to really escape into super clever words, so the ideas are funny and the words are just like beautifully clever. So that's what I picked up recently, just as the same thing, just to like escape from the world for 10 minutes at a time.
So that's Zoo by Ogden Nash. That's very cool too. And mine also is an escape because it's Book Lovers by Emily Henry. And I saw it in the bookstore. They had a massive pile of them. And it's a rom-com. And but one of the nice things about it is it's kind of set in the literary world. So the main character, Nora, is actually an agent who works really hard for her authors, and she is persuaded by her sister to go and spend a month in the country in a small town in North Carolina, where her sister is hoping to set her up with someone. So it's kind of following that trope of people leaving the big city where they have this high-powered job and they go to a small town and fall in love. But the person she happens to run into in the small town, her sister's setting her up with lots of people, but she keeps running into this guy who is an editor from the city who she really does not get on with at all. So you can guess what happens in terms of the romance there, but it is nice because it doesn't entirely turn out in terms of their careers. They don't have to give up their careers to get together, but they're going to get together somehow because it's a rom-com. But so nice. It's nice. It's fun and it's an easy read. So I quite enjoyed that too. So thank you both of you for sharing your books with us and for sharing your wisdom on avoiding lost dogs and keeping them close by or making sure they have a really good recall. Maria, where should people go if they want to learn more about you or find your website or your social media? Where do they go?
Yeah, the website is fetchtheleash.biz, and we have Instagram and Facebook, Fetch the Leash. So it's pretty easy.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming to chat with us. We were both absolutely thrilled that you agreed to talk to us because you're such an incredible dog trainer. And I especially love the way you bring your background into the way that you teach dog training too. I think it's just wonderful. So yeah, thank you very, very much indeed.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
And thank you to everyone watching this. If you liked it, please hit the subscribe button so that you make sure you're the first to know whenever there's a new episode, and we'll see you soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Positive Posting Conversation. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the show and write us a review via your podcast app. For the show notes, visit companionanimalpsychology.com. This show was produced by Zazie Todd. The music is Melody from Paris by Studio Le Bousse. See you next time.